There's a term I'd like to introduce you to if you're not familiar with it, and that is detached self-observation. Hi, my name is Ted Meissner. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage, and today we're going to be talking about how this capacity for detached self-observation can have an impact on your development in so many ways. Please do take just a moment right now, if you would, if you haven't already, and tap that subscribe button. It helps a great deal to make sure that this podcast is available to others. So let's get started. Our guest today is Lea Loncar. Lea, welcome to the podcast. I have been looking forward to this ever since I read through your paper. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
So before we dive into this work, and I want to be clear with the people who are watching or listening to this podcast, this is not a research paper. It is a theoretical paper instead, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Before we go into that, Lea, I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit about who you are and what you do for people who might not have encountered you before.
Oh, yes, of course. So I live in Norway, where I teach at NTNU University, Department of Psychology. And I have been teaching a number of different subjects, but my main area, I would say, is health psychology. I'm also very much into qualitative methodologies. I'm very much interested also in cultural psychology. And my work, my PhD work, was on secondary trauma and stress. So this is kind of in general the fields. But my deep love is contemplative practices and creating the bridge between traditional embodied knowledge from different cultures and translating it into academic work, interest, and inquiries.
Wonderful. Thank you for that overview. And I know that that can be just that one piece, that translation part of like, how does this apply to our contemporary understanding of the workings of the mind can be very challenging. So let's
Exactly.
get into a bit this theoretical paper. Could you tell us a little bit about how it got started? What prompted you to write this piece, and what is it about?
Well, I wrote this paper is about detached self-observation as a developmental catalyst. The interest was there already in my 20s when I was a psychology student. And I was very much interested in existential and phenomenological perspectives that were kind of the only one that gave me really some kind of overview or some kind of window into this introspective nature of human beings and how our thought and how our processes actually could be very much embodied and felt from the inside, from the skin. And psychology as a discipline gave me more um, uh, understanding about how we relate to the world, how our development happens. So it didn't give so much this existential phenomenological perspective at the time of my study. So my ideas developed already then. And I wrote the first draft of that paper when I was maybe around 25. So that's over 25 years ago. And that paper was just like settling and waiting for another good moment where I got inspired. And that paper I wrote then this year after finalizing my PhD. It's just I was in the wave of excitement and enthusiasm about continuing my research and having that opportunity to go back to my first love, which is the meditative contemplative practices. So it came very like an inspiration and putting on the paper everything that was bubbling in my system for years, actually.
So it's been a long time in the making, and maybe we can start with that topic. of detached self observation for purposes of this paper. What is meant by that? What is it?
Well, that's a very good question because we know through the contemporary research, there is a lot of research on mindfulness, and there is a lot of nuances that we find in different papers, how this is described and what do we put into this concept of mindfulness. And I was looking into the different practices that are present in the different parts of the world, different cultures, different subgroups or subcultures, all themselves can call meditation, contemplation, dadiri. There are different names for those practices in different parts of cultures. But what they have in common is that subtle presence of being able to observe whatever is at the moment. So it could be some internal process like observing the breath or observing the posture. It's usually somehow connected with the body. The body is have this primacy, how phenomenologists would like to say, the primacy of the body. So there is either something going on in our mental compound. So what is common for all these practices, either they're religious or non-religious, is this presence and just watching, that watchfulness. And this is really across the different studies. And mindfulness has a lot of elements from it, but it has other aspects as well. Buddhism has then different nuances of those practices. But I would say the common is this observation. Somebody calls it the self. It could be called just observation, just standing or staying in that presence, internal presence of one own being, and just observing whatever is happening in the moment. And that is not like an exercise, watchfulness, moment to moment, what will happen, but just observing the stream of consciousness, put it that way. Either it's accelerating towards the body or towards something else or towards internal perception.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I know that's a big one and was, in fact, one of the main questions you proposed in the paper is what do we mean by this?
Mm.
And there's one thing that you just mentioned in this, which really caught my attention, and that was that it's not just one thing, that there are different ways in which this may show up culturally. So we can't just say, in contemporary world, we all mean the same thing. That's influenced by culture. It may have different perspectives in scientific treatments, in mental health. They can have different views on that. I'm wondering what were some of the things that you found that were interesting to you as you were working on this and seeing cultural differences or different scientific views on it?
Yes, what is really interesting is how we can view this, let's say, phenomena of detached self-observation, and it might unfold very differently in depending on what kind of symbols, interactions, um, or culture we are living in. And now I'm not meaning only that you have different symbols, like in one culture it's a Buddha, another one is Shiva, and another one is Jesus or Mary. But even the presence of the body can be culturally mediated differently. And that I find fascinating. And it depends really what have you habitually been practicing? What have you habitually been installing in your system? What are your, um, uh, let's say, pathways to go to when you're gonna experience something? So some people may be experiencing things very much through the body, through sensations of the body, because that's the place to go to refer to the world or inner experience or understanding oneself. While for others, the body is more numb and the pathways, let's say pathways, have not been encouraged or cultivated to connect with that aspect of ourselves or that I wouldn't even say aspects of part, but that whole of ourselves. And we are not experiencing through the bodily sensations the world, ourselves, or our emotions. So that would be mediated either by culture or the way you've grown up or what have been encouraged. What have you been encouraged to practice? So we are very, very different. We are more different than we think, but in the same time, we are the same. The phenomena is the same, but it's mediated differently,
That's
depending on so many layers, ecological layers that we are involved in through being in the world.
exactly. And this is one of the most important things with in my primary field, mindfulness interventions, is understanding not just the cultural setting in which the person is from, but their own connectedness or disconnectedness from it. How does that show up for them? You used the term pathways, and what's been encouraged or maybe starved out is different. It's not all the same for every single person simply because they come from a particular cultural context,
Exactly.
which means we'll never be bored. There's always that variety.
And that also makes it more difficult to communicate the experiences. Because if there is no resonance, there will be even a doubt that this experience exists. If somebody is more in touch with, through cultivation, let's say of meditation, more in touch with that spaces of reflection, perhaps life and life world is experienced differently. And those who are not cultivating that, that doesn't mean that they are less off, but it means that the potential of that cultivation is not there. They will not be able even to contemplate or to connect with this theoretically, even because it doesn't make, there is no, let's say, phenomena embodied. So if it's not embodied, it's very difficult to connect because it goes beyond the intellectual, the cognitive. So it's more the holistic, full experience. And if there is no fullness of that experience, then it's very difficult to connect only through semantics, through the words or symbols that are not even shared.
I completely agree, and this factors into this idea of embodiment within mindfulness and how very complex that itself is. But what I'd like to get into is you mentioned another term, and I know this is in the paper itself, is that detached self-observation is a catalyst for development. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you could say a bit more about that.
Well, let's put it in a very practical terms. Let's say somebody who is not familiar with meditation um, tries to do the practice just to sit still without specific task. So let's say we shut down a bit of this task-oriented, task-positive network. And the person is just sitting and observing whatever is ruminating usually in the system, the stream of consciousness. And no particular other instruction needs to be given. There is this, let's say, trust in the nature, that the course of our nature, our um, innate system will be able to recognize that practice or will be able to recognize that space of just being in observation of reflection of the thought process. Not only thought process, but also whatever happens in the body, the breath, the sounds, so the senses, everything can get involved. Now, the idea is that once we have created that space by itself, let's put in the terms of dynamic system theory, it's going to disturb the established patterns. And established patterns can be that we have go-to thoughts or patterns of thoughts. It could be negative thoughts or positive thoughts or, yeah, task-oriented thoughts. So it's going to disturb a bit because we are creating or cultivating part that is not fitting in the rest, especially if you're a new meditator, if you're new to this kind of practices. So there will be normally a resistance because every system, including our system that is maybe not optimal, will resist the change. System likes to perpetuate itself. So, but with cultivation, with repetition, I believe that through repetition of being in that space of, to begin with, it's going to feel like boredom. People usually fall asleep. They don't see the point of that. But consistency in repeating that, it will create something, some spaciousness that's going to disturb the previous system. And this disturbance of the patterns in itself will trigger a new restructuring. And that in that process of new restructuring, we are able to bring some new semiotic, some new meanings. So the meaning creation process is also encouraged by such spaciousness or such a reflective space. And that kind of rolls towards different outcomes that can be in terms of developing wisdom or ethics, or uh, we talked about leadership and yeah, how it can really affect the whole way of being into the world and for the world.
There was a particular phrase that you used in the paper that caught my attention, and it pertains to what you've just been speaking about. And that phrase was over time. And this was such an important aspect of it. I wanted to unpack that with you a little bit. Is that it's not about I listened to a 5 minute meditation and now all that developmental change has happened. We can completely ignore dynamic systems theory that has its own momentum and takes time to change. This takes time. And I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit more about that, because this is development. It's not instantaneous.
Yes, this is very interesting. And actually, my observation about this time factor as almost most important, the consistency of repetition. I mean, we know it from the Latin and Greek philosophers. You have to repeat. Studium est mater repetorum. I think something like that, that the study, the repetition is the mother of study. So the repetition is extremely important factor that those pathways get established. Even on the neural level, we know from cognitive and neural psychology that you need time to establish a certain patterns and you need to repeat them to establish them. To use medicine for mania or psychosis, it will take a long time, month, 2, 3, until it starts to work. So everything that we really want to see a long-term effect, it needs a long-term practice. There are no quick fixes, and this is kind of a also suggestion for everyone that thinks that through one breath work the life will change. Probably it's going to trigger something and it can create curiosity, but it's not going to make these long-term changes, developmental changes. And life is, I mean, we are developing lifelong. We are not developing only until adulthood. We are still developing until the time, until the last breath. So, in a way, those contemplative practices give us a little bit more of an agency in which direction we want to develop through cultivating those certain practices without moralizing what is good, what is bad. Here is really about that certain practices, by cultivating those, we'll be able to break certain patterns that we are constantly creating. So if we have, let's say, some default modus of this spaciousness that is interrupting whatever pattern wants to get hooked into our system, in a way we are more free. We will not be so conditioned, perhaps. That could be another paper.
Yeah, and that's actually a beautiful segue into what I wanted to explore with you next, which was what would you like to see happen next with this perhaps nuanced understanding of detached self observation? What would you like to see happen next?
I really would like seeing this happening translated into the everyday life world, and making it more accessible into education, into colleges, students, teachers, healthcare practices, that we are able to, maybe from the grassroots, because I don't see how that can happen top down, but I can see that it can happen bottom up, that people are gaining that awareness. I mean, Adyashanti said it so beautifully, wake up or perish. So there is something about that, perpetuating the world as we are creating it right now is just making things more and more complex, and we are trying to manage that complexity by bringing new complexity. There is something more radical in need, and it feels that psychology can help very much, contemplative practices can help very much. We need more of those soft skills and common understanding. And we need more research on those topics. I just recently was censored in one paper where they've done scope review about yoga practices for trauma, and there are so few actually. If we look at the number of research that is funded for this kind of research is sabotaged. Um, and I would like to see more bridges toward the scientific knowledge that we are quite good at, and we have the methods and we have the instruments and we have fundings, and the traditional knowledge that is dying out if we are not bringing some bridge to bring it to life, um, and not leaving it just to commercial hypes. So my hope is really to take those knowledge seriously, more seriously.
I think you said that very well because it's one of the challenges that I'm sensing and others are finding within the field of mindfulness is that integration isn't happening. It is getting lost in the hype of download this app. And again, most users are not using an app that they sign up for after 30 days. And when you tie that to the understanding that this takes time, that efficacy is lost for most people who come to this. So, how we bridge that gap, the gap of just bringing these understandings, practices, trainings, exercises, however we want to view them in a way that is accessible for the people who could benefit from it, bringing that into their daily lives
Yes.
and supporting that ongoing is I don't think I agree with you. I don't think that's going to come from the top because that's always going to be through a lens of profitability
Mm.
rather than participant outcomes and well-being.
Well, in that sense, personally, I have a little bit of trust in nature that
Mm.
uh, it's going to create like a dynamic system theory. It's going to create some order, although now it can look bad. But there things are happening on a small scale perhaps, but there are like small communities. There are some researchers they want to connect. You and me are talking here. There is a lot of effort across the continents to do some good, and there is this evolutionary theory, the survival of the fittest, but there is also the survival of the wisest and the kindest. So I think if we are a little bit more open to different narratives of how we can function as a human being and together with all the other beings in this planet, it's not a naive view, it's very realistic if we are emphasizing a bit of a gaze towards different kind of narrative, that narrative should come more easily, and people should get more faith back into humanity, and for that they need some results. So we need some research, and we need some communities, and we need some cooperation with hospitals and health personnel who can implement that in their small communities of patients. So I think to make it more accessible, and now I see at least in Europe and Norway, health personnel is looking for uh, to start with quick fixes, like is there any self-regulation technique we can use? But in the long run, as they were repeating it, it's going to start to work. So I have faith. I have faith to, and there is a lot of young people, students who are looking for new pathways. So that will also encourage. I'm positive.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And without what you've just described, it's just darkness coming. It's just digging us into a deeper hole.
Yes,
So
wake up or perish. There is
yeah,
only those two
yeah,
possibilities right now.
yeah. So for those who are interested, I will be providing a couple of links for you to follow up on. Our guest today, Lea Loncar. Lea, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for being here today, and please do be sure to tap that subscribe button. It makes a tremendous difference to me, and I really appreciate it if you would. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can, and I'll see you again soon on Mindfulness Voyage.